Howdy. Welcome to the conversation with. I have another amazing guest today. Believe it or not, it's surprise, surprise. We tend to bring in people from all over the face of the planet these days. Sometimes they're specific to animation, sometimes they're totally not, and sometimes they're somewhere in between, which is, I think, a pretty fair description of our guest today. I have not had the pleasure of working with her, I don't think, and she might correct me on that. It's not going to feel really bad on stream, but I know a lot of the local directors who have, and I was over at IDOS when I know she was working a little bit with the team, the Tomb Raider team. So David has actually had a chance to work directly with this particular guest. So I'm going to bring him first in, and he can do probably a better introduction than I could ever dream of doing. So let's do that right now, Mr. Hebert. Oh yeah, I forgot to warn everybody about your background. It's changed, so they might not recognize you.
It's my on-the-road edition of the background, right, since I'm not home. But cannot cancel or not attend one of those conversations with anyone. So there we go. I have a laptop. I have a little mic. I found a decent internet connection. So let's do this.
Let's face it. If you didn't make it to these, then your social life would be completely crippled, because this pretty much is your social life. These streams these days.
Yes, Brent.
I mean, I'm just saying. Maybe I'm projecting. That's my social life, and sorry for the projection.
Another actress. Actually, today that's going to be fun. As you mentioned, we have a lot of that are directly into the animation or video game industry, and others that are in it, but a little bit in periphery, that they jump back and forth. And today it's very much the case. I had the chance to work with Amber in the past, so that's another great excuse for me to catch up and just having a good time for an hour and a half. So I'd say let's bring her in and get this started.
Okay, sounds good. I'm going to bring in the one and only Amber Goldfarb. One sec. Hello, Amber. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Amber, actually, something that I'm curious that we've never talked when we work with each other is how did you get into acting in the first place? When was this crazy idea emerge in your head that it might be something that I'd like to do?
I like a good Genesis story.
Well, for me, I don't have a very good memory of my childhood, but I have a few memories that really stand out, and that is one of them. I was 6 and I was watching a sitcom on TV while I was playing with my toys. And I remember looking at the TV and being like, oh, that's the thing I'm going to do. I just knew. And I never wavered from that. I never... Yeah.
It was like a familiar feeling. Like you're just like, it was just a matter of fact. Like, oh yeah, of course, I'm going to do that. I'm destined to do this.
Oh, exactly. It wasn't a decision. It was just like a realization or like a remembering. It was like, oh yeah, that's the thing that I'm going to do. Very strange.
Do you remember answering that question when you get the classic question when you were younger, what you're going to do when you grow up, and that's what you said too? Like, was it?
So the first time I was asked that question, I was like, I'm going to be a kitten. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's good.
So we were taking care of there was like a stray cat. We lived in the country, and there was a stray cat, and she had birthed a litter, and I think then the mama passed, and so we were taking care of the litter, and I was like, I'm gonna be a kitten, and then my sister was like, well, you can't be that. So
your older sister, obviously, right?
Yes.
Party pooper.
Yeah,
But that's pretty impressive, because there might be a lot of 6-year-old that would dream to become an astronaut. And then you figure out eventually what you're really going to do. You just stick to it.
Yeah, I stuck to it. And my mom was protective of me. I've always been a very sensitive creature, so she didn't want to put me in harm's way. So she didn't push me to do it. Every step that I wanted to take had to come from me. So in school I would do plays, and like I was always like super loud. All the parents would be like, wow, we can actually hear your child, and whereas the other kids, we can't hear them. I was very comfortable being the center of attention, and I always loved that. And then I went on to theater school, and I got an agent, and I just kind of went through all the motions myself. But my mom was like, I'm not going to push you to be a child actor, because she was sure that I'd become a drug addict, and depressed, and I probably would have. She probably saved me, like coming to it on my own as I got older and had more experience and developed a thicker skin, because you're so subject to criticism all the time. And I think as a kid, I had a hard time with. I was always very sensitive, and it was really hard to get negative feedback, and that was something that I worked on a lot, and now it's it's a daily occurrence.
I mean, what I don't understand the connection. So you're saying putting yourself out there in the public eye would, in that particular capacity, bring some sort of criticism in some ways? I don't understand.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
When you actually started to be in some plays and study and all that, was it what you expected when you were more younger, and what it was for you to be an actress or to play it in front of an audience?
Yeah, definitely. It was what I expected, and then some of that died when I was in theater school, because I had a very abusive professor who liked to manipulate and play with students and bring them up and tear them down. He was one of those. And I felt total prey to him. Like he was my mentor. I admired him so much. And so I was really susceptible to that. And that whole experience kind of killed my love of performance, because I got in my head and I was just hypercritical and putting myself down. And then after theater school, I had to unlearn my training a little bit to reconnect with my instincts and to trust myself and to feel free in terms of my creativity.
Did you do this on your own?
I took classes, and I had some good teachers that were much more positive in their approach and encouraging. And then I did a lot of work on my own. I did The Artist's Way. And that was a game changer for me. It was like for me, it was self-guided therapy. You're supposed to do it over 3 months. It took me 8 months. But I did all the exercises and all the artist dates, and I would journal every day, and I worked through all that shit, all those voices in my head, telling me what I could and couldn't do and what I was capable of, and all those limited beliefs. And I pushed past that. And on the other end, I was able to trust myself again and trust my instincts. And I think that that's so important as a creative person, to not be stuck in what's right and what's wrong and what do people think all the time, but be able to have an inspiration or an idea and carry it through. Obviously the criticism is an important part that comes later, but if your critical mind is too powerful at the beginning, then you can't get anything done, right? Like it prevents you from advancing any projects, because that's that fear of failure all the time.
This story of abuse, unfortunately, is a story that we've heard more than once, especially in the movie industry. What do you think makes this specific industry susceptible to having this kind of abuse of power that seems to be more than other industries in general?
I think artists in general are more susceptible because of the fact that it's hard. It's not like science or math where, it's clearer and easier to grade. Like just the fact of having to grade art, it's very difficult, right? It's because it's so subjective. And I think that a lot of artists go into school and are looking for someone to believe in them and someone to say, yes, you can do it. You've got what it takes. And those people in those positions see how much power they have by being able to lift someone up or to give them that confidence, but you can take it away as quickly as you can give it. And there's a huge discrepancy in power in terms of like being able to cast actors in good roles, right? Like if my teacher is also my director, they have say over whether or not I get a good role in the show, whether or not I get exposure. And the arts are like that, right? It's like connections count for a lot, personal relationships. And so when you see someone that can help you elevate, oh my God, no. Did I just crash?
No, you're still
here.
That was so weird. Okay, I'm here. My window just like disappeared all of a sudden.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Screensaver, maybe?
Yeah, that was so strange. So I was like, I crashed. This is over.
That was a pretty genuine reaction right there.
Yeah,
I was like, wow, that's a great.
You're just flexing. She's just showing off her acting skills. That's all that was. Pay no attention. You fooled us all. By the way, that backstory sounds almost like a spin-off from Whiplash. Like, you know what I mean? It's like
Mhm.
like right from the screenplay notes.
Yes, that film, I was, I was having PTSD
I
watching
would
that.
imagine.
Yeah, yeah, they did it
Yeah.
so well. I have to say they really pulled it off well. But yeah, it's really that power of, I have the connections to get you
Yeah.
ahead.
That's right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's intimate. Like artwork, there's something very intimate about creating art.
Yep.
It's very personal, and acting especially, you have to open up about. Oh, you don't have to, but oftentimes the work gets, when you get deep into it, you open up, you explore emotions, you explore
hmm
past experiences, memories.
Yeah.
So that kind of information also can give a teacher a lot of power when they know those things about you.
For sure.
Um,
Yeah.
so now there's a lot, I think there's a big push to be like more trauma informed for educators to
Mm.
be aware of boundaries and consent and just kind of respecting not only students' body boundaries but also like emotional, personal
Mm.
boundaries. There's more awareness around mental health, and I think that's a really good thing. We needed that.
Mm.
Yeah, I feel that even in the workspace, it's the same, because I've seen, in my career, some behavior from directors or supervisors that would, the way that they would provide the feedback to an artist in front of everyone else at a moment that, already as an artist you're kind of vulnerable, because it's a little bit of us that we present to everyone for review, to everyone to judge and hopefully maybe give constructive criticism. But so many, animators and other artists that I've seen that, oh God, they're not going to spend a good evening, because there's a way to help, artists or anyone else to kind of improve their work and grow. And there's a way that you might get to the same result, but you might destroy a little bit of them
Yeah,
in the process. And I think there's a growing awareness of how to communicate and how to properly behave with
for sure.
others to avoid being too destructful in your communication.
Absolutely. I mean, anything can be said, right? It's how you say it in a way. Like if you want to give
Hmm.
someone constructive feedback, there's a way to say it, there's a time to say it. Using a humiliation tactic where you out someone in front of everybody about something that they did that you hated or some personal information, like, well,
Yeah.
maybe that's the most
And like
effective,
many
it's not
things,
the most effective way.
it's a balance, because if you go too much on the other side and everything is rainbow, and sometimes I had, on the other side of the spectrum, I had supervisors give it feedback on my work, and it was like, was that just 5 minutes of praise, or was there any constructive criticism in there? And I had to dig to, no, just tell me, what do I need to, okay, well, because you can sugarcoat to a point that it's become either a waste of time or almost useless. But to find the right balance, to be constructive with your feedback but still have
Yeah.
empathy, is not always an easy balance to
That's so
find.
true. I'm a really big fan of compassionate communication or nonviolent communication.
Mm, yeah.
Um, it's like connecting to your needs and your feelings and being able to communicate from a place of those needs. And it was very foreign to me when I started learning about it, but at its root, it's very simple because we we all have needs, we all have feelings, and that's not going to change. Like you can be in a very rational job and be like, nope, this is like this and that is like that. But at the end of the day, we're human. We are emotional creatures. And if we deny that part of who we are, it comes out in weird ways. Like people will be passive aggressive or they'll
Mm.
power trip or it'll become a power struggle. But if you can just get to the root of things, the simple root of things and communicate from that place, it's also like people can be so much more receptive when you're speaking from a place of your needs and not attacking them. Like
Yeah.
we tend to be very blamey in how we speak, like just the way our language has evolved, like you hurt me versus I was sad when this happened or I was disappointed when this happened. But to
Mhm.
put the blame on a person, immediately their defenses come up and they feel attacked.
Yeah. It's tricky business. I think having a lot of self-awareness is part of it, and also being able to have a good level of empathy for the people around you also helps. But at the end of the day, there are sharks in the waters, right? There are sociopathic thinkers out there, and it makes things a little bit tricky, even if you have good defense mechanisms and you can have good coping mechanisms. And unfortunately, in my experience, there are an unfortunate number of people that are a bit predatorial in these creative industries. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because of all the vulnerabilities. I mean, when I think of an actor or an actress, like they share the same common sort of issues that any artist has, which is like you were saying before, you put a lot of yourself out there. It's very personal, and people are going to judge that. But I think that I always found that actors and actresses are in a unique position of being like almost like more vulnerable to this, because where we at least we're acting through a proxy, right? An animator can act through a character. There are ideas and we're very close to them, but I think it must feel very different for you because you're embodying those ideas, and it's your own persona, and your how your physical how you look and how you sound and all these other things get packaged up into that work. And I can imagine the criticisms feel all that much more personal because of it. How does an actress today like deal with what kind of coping mechanisms, other than the things you were saying, do you usually find yourself employing to survive that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to answer that. I also want to go back to something you said about how there are a lot of predators, right? And you can go in with good intentions and in good faith, but then I don't think I would have ever known how to deal with a predator had I not experienced one. It's really hard to protect people from that experience until they've had it, and then they're like, oh, I know what the red flags are now. I know what behavior to look out for. Like if someone is continually putting me down, there's a way to give constructive feedback, and you need to. Like this is such it's
part of the job.
Essential, and honesty is essential for our work. But if someone is constantly putting you down and like just kind of chipping away at your self-esteem, like that is such a red flag to me now, right? But had I not gone through that experience, I wouldn't have known it. And so it's really tricky to warn people of the signs, because also these people tend to be very charming, and they really know how to like gain your trust and win you over and say the things that you want to hear, and then it just or like present to you opportunities and the things that they might be able to help you with, and you're like, wow, this is amazing. It's finally someone who wants to help me out. And then the predatory behavior comes out. So in
comes the quid pro quo. Like
that's
there's always some catch somewhere.
Exactly. And so I think that initially what I needed was a lot of forgiveness of myself, because I felt like I had failed myself and let myself down by letting someone in and being so vulnerable. And I've seen this happen to friends and colleagues of mine. And so I think that starting with self-compassion for a situation where you did fall victim doesn't mean you have to stay a victim. And I think that that's an important thing. That's why the language of survivor, even if people are like, I don't identify as a survivor because, I wasn't abused this way or that way. But I think that language came into place because walking around with like a victim aura is not interesting. That doesn't feel empowering, right? You were a victim in a situation, but you want to feel empowered. And so I've, the various experiences of discrimination or misogyny that I've had throughout my career, I was always like, okay, clock what happened. And if there's a way to address it, do. But an awareness is like really was the first step for me. But then I was like, I don't want to carry this in my energy field. I don't want to walk around the world with a chip on my shoulder. Because there's times when I didn't get paid as much as my male counterpart, or I didn't get the same opportunities because I'm a woman and stuff like that. And when I started out, I wasn't aware of that stuff. But going through the industry now, I've been like, oh, yeah, he fucked up. And everyone laughed. And then when I fucked up, everyone stopped and got really quiet.
Oh, interesting.
Interesting. Like so
Hmm.
subtle, but it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
like there was more room. I realized there was more room for my male counterparts to make mistakes, and there was less for me.
That's
The bar
fascinating.
was set higher for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Um,
Amber, how would you react now if you would see, if you would sense those kind of predatory
Yeah.
little, signs that you would
yeah.
see? How would
She
you?
carries a lightsaber.
Because I'm assuming that you would not wait. Well, I don't know. Let's wait a little bit, see if it's. You would kind of do something about it, maybe a little bit more rapidly.
Well, I okay, so the oftentimes I don't realize right away until after. I come
Mm,
home and I'm like,
right.
what
Yeah.
happened today? Like you
Hmm.
feel kind
Totally.
of
Let me process. Yeah.
icky.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Let me process this. And so sometimes I don't realize. And so oftentimes I'll sit down and I'll journal about it. And I'll be like, what happened today? Okay. And I'll
Mm,
think and I'll try to look at it from different angles and try to zoom out a little bit
yeah.
from
You're
my
trying to
own experience.
unpack it somehow, right?
Unpack it. Sometimes if there's other people there that were kind of witnesses to it that I
Mm,
trust, I'll be like, "What was your read on this situation?" Just
yeah.
to get a different perspective. And sometimes right away I'm like, "Oh, okay. Okay, that makes sense." Or other times they'll be like, "No, that was insane." And so it just helps to give a bit of perspective. But it only works if it's someone that you one really trust or someone that can be compassionate to your situation because they might have their own unconscious biases and just not be aware of what your experience is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it depends. But if there's someone that you think they are sensitive to this issue and they'll be aware, then I'll ask for their opinion. And then usually I'll write out like, okay, next time this happens, what am I going to say? What's my line? Right? So I'm prepared. I'm psychologically
Yeah.
prepared to react to that situation in an effective way because usually as it's happening, if you can kind of nip something in the bud or you can speak up, it can help. So I had an experience where I had a director who um, he was raising his voice at me a lot.
Mm.
He would, if I didn't get something right away and didn't understand right away, he would just start
Oh,
getting really loud. And
okay.
then I would panic
Right.
and go into like fight or flight, like I'm in
For
danger.
sure.
And then it would just get worse, like because you're no
Huh.
longer in when you enter fight or flight, you're no longer in the creative part of your brain.
Yeah,
You're in
for
your
sure.
reptilian survival mode,
100%.
right? So it kept happening, and then I journaled about it. I thought about it, and then the next time it happened, when I went back on set, I said, he came up to me and gave me some positive reinforcement. And he was like, "Oh, I really like working with you." And I was like, "I really like working with you too. I just want to say that when you get loud in your feedback, like in your constructive feedback, I kind of shut down and I'm no longer receptive." And I was like, "I want
Mm.
to hear your notes. I want to hear what you have to say.
Mhm. Mhm.
Could you speak to me just like in a calm voice and just tell it to me straight without, getting so heated and so loud?"
Right.
He was, of course, very apologetic, and he was like, "Thank you so much for telling me." And he took it really well. He took it like a champ, and he did adjust his behavior, and I really
Oh, wow.
appreciated that.
That could have went a very different direction.
It could have gone a very different direction. And a colleague of mine overheard and was like, "Wow, like
Yeah.
kudos for
Nice.
you for doing
Yeah.
that," because they had noticed it too, and it
Yeah.
wasn't like they backed me up. They were like, "I saw what you saw,
Mhm.
and I really respect that you said something." And I didn't, and I said it privately. Like I didn't say,
Yeah, yeah.
my colleague
That would
overheard, but I didn't say it in front of
the
everyone
set.
else, because
Yeah.
you don't want to embarrass someone, right? That
No.
wasn't my intention, but I was just like, I want to do a good job. Like I really
Yeah.
care about the work,
Well,
and
that's the irony, right? It's like you should be praised for this because you're telling him what you need for him to get what he needs out of you. Basically, you're
exactly,
saying, "Look, like I want to be there for you. I totally get this. I'm down with everything here, but unfortunately, that the way you're interacting with me, it makes you're getting like 50% or less of me, which is obviously a
exactly.
problem."
Exactly, and he
Interesting,
was probably, to his defense, he was probably under pressure and
for
stressed
sure, for
and all of
sure.
those things, but
Yeah,
it's like, that doesn't mean that raising your voice at someone for
that's
asking,
right.
for not understanding something right away. Like
Yeah,
you need,
yeah,
as a leader, someone in a position of leadership, you need to have some patience and
totally.
explaining things,
That's right.
you can't expect people to understand things right away because they're not in your head.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. This a similar situation came up once. We were talking about. I think wasn't it Ilse that was that story about like it was in it was like a training scenario or something like that in school. And
Mhm.
it was, and I remember like it was something similar where they were kind of almost borderline abusive, and finally something had to be said. And it's funny because at the end of the day, you kind of need to like, if everyone is truly in it for the right reasons and they're good actors as opposed to bad actors and they're literally just trying to get a good job done, then this is exactly what should happen. People should be able to communicate on this level and there should be no issue. Because I mean, at the end of the day, we're all under pressure, right? All of us. And if you can put yourself in other person's shoes, maybe they're acting like you said, like that intuition was so good. Like consider why they're acting like this.
Right.
They're just another human being, just like you, in their own. They got their own story going on. They got their own pressures going on, and they may not even be aware that they're so. You know, to go at them in a very human way and be like, look, this is how I'm feeling. You know what I mean? Like, by the way, like I have no control over it. You're doing something, maybe not even on purpose, but what's happening, I can tell you how it makes me feel and how it changes my current perception is this. And we got to, one way or another, we have to deal with that. You know, we're not calling anybody any names. I'm not accusing anybody of doing anything wrong, but this is the reality right now. And can we move forward is basically, you know, it's,
And I mean,
Amber, go ahead, David.
Just to as like a little final note on that story is that, you know, he never hired me again.
Interesting.
So that's the risk, right? The thing
but maybe that's good.
Right. Maybe.
I mean, you know what I mean? Maybe that's fate. Maybe that is not good chemistry, and because you're still making a good living right now, and like you don't need them, right? Basically, maybe.
But that's the risk, and I guess I just wanted, because I don't want to say like it's all fairies and whatever,
right?
Rainbows.
Yeah, no, for sure.
It's, you know, it's. I have no idea what expression I just said, by the way.
Fairies. Apparently fairies are good.
Apparently,
I get basically rainbows, lollipops, fairies.
Exactly. Like,
amazing.
What?
Yeah.
But I just wanted that's the risk, right? Because you weigh your stakes. And I think a lot of times people don't speak up. And again, that comes back to why someone like has so much power in these positions is that you don't speak up because we are self-employed, we're contractors.
Yes.
And so knowing like, okay, I'm going to advocate for myself here, but it may mean not getting hired again by this person and being okay with that. And I think that probably in the back of my mind, I knew that was a risk I was taking, but I was like, either it's going to be a respectful work environment for everyone, or maybe we're not the right fit and we shouldn't work together anymore.
Yeah, I think we all need to have some guidelines of, you cannot ask each time, okay, I think that maybe it was abusive, so what might be the result if I see something? No, just, you know, if you recognize the sign, say something about it, do it in a professional manner. And yes, sometimes it means that you're not going to have more work. Other times it'll be totally fine. And other times it'll be even better because you will develop a even better relationship, and that's going to open other doors. So
in the creative process, there has to be a push and pull. Like, you know, my husband and I, we say it like in our relationship, you know, he's the person I choose to fight with, right? Because you fight and you grow and you learn and you push each other's limits and boundaries and in a positive way. Like it should be positive, but they're like you challenge each other's maybe belief system sometimes, or you just think outside their box. And I think creatively it's the same way. When you work with people in a creative sense, you fight, but you don't have to fight dirty.
No, that's it.
You have creative differences, and that's part of the journey. And I think that's important to leave space for that.
Well, I mean, fighting in that when you have good intentions and there's conflict there, it's loaded with opportunities to grow and understand. And that's the understanding part is key, right? Is if you can better understand the director and the director can better understand you, that relationship is critical for success. I mean, like trust, as we always say, like we hear actresses and actors always talk about trust as being almost the single most important ingredient on that set, especially when you're putting so much trust into a director who's going to be giving you feedback. You know, you don't want to be second guessing that feedback, right? And the only way to not second guess it is to trust. And the only way to have trust is to have some sort of understanding and some sort of, I don't know.
Yes.
It makes me wonder because like, here's $1 million question. This one's going to be fun. Hot potato. If Stanley Kubrick was still around, would he get away with the kind of stuff that he used to do on set? I don't think he would. And this is also tricky, right? Because at the end of the day, and by the way, for people who don't know what I'm talking about, Stanley Kubrick, of course, most people probably know who he is considered one of the best directors of all time, which is kind of what kind of muddies the waters of this conversation a little bit. And Shelley Duvall on the set of The Shining with Jack Nicholson. She was the wife, Jack Nicholson's wife. And if anyone's ever seen the movie The Shining, it's one of the best performances you will ever see of her, literally her state of mind disintegrating throughout that film. And the backstory is that Stanley Kubrick was intentionally, like, literally disassembling her mind by a lot of cruel, apparently, I mean, I wasn't there, but past reflections on it for people who were there, that's, would most of them would say that it was probably pretty cruel what he put her through psychologically. And this is, of course, when the cameras weren't even rolling. It was he wanted to do that because, quote unquote, he needed her to be really literally unhinged by the end of it. So it's a quick tricky, right? Because it's like, it's hard to argue with those results. But I mean, at the same time, like it makes me wonder if does it come down to consent? Like, how do you or is it just completely inappropriate to work like that with an actor and actress?
But even consent at that point, because there's a
you're right. Then
position of power,
right.
It could be a false or perceived consent, but that is wrong, even if it is. Consent. My impression that nowadays most people will think that going for an actor to go through this emotional pain is not worth the prize for having an Oscar-winning performance. I think that generally it doesn't mean that everyone is thinking like this, but I think this is where we're going. That it doesn't make sense to personally, destroy someone to have something that's going to be on film to that caliber.
I agree with that.
So, Amber, do you feel like? So to go back to the $1 million question, do you feel like it is possible to get performances that are that real and that visceral without employing such tactics in your mind? Or is this just like touching the sun and we should never touch the sun, basically?
I mean, I think it is. I mean, my approach, for me, like in my work, I'm not someone who, if my character is distressed, I don't want to be abused to get there. That's not my approach. I'm not method, if you will. I do believe that, acting is play and it's pretend. But we're storytellers, and as storytellers, you can tap into things. Like, you can tap in. I really do believe that you can tap into experiences that are different than your own, but you can get in so deep that you can express the essence of what that experience is. And sometimes that's stuff like I'll do exploratory things on my own, or like in the safety of my home, or with an acting coach, or with a friend and a colleague. Sometimes the exploration work can be really good to like free the mind and to tap into stuff and discover things. But absolutely, I do think that there are ways of getting there. There's tools. There's other tools of getting there than having to abuse someone on set. Like, my philosophy is, I want everyone on a set that I'm on, I want everyone to feel respected and to have, a sense of dignity and humanity in their work, and to be treated well. And the way we get to things can be done. I really do think we can get to the deep, really powerful performances in other ways.
Right.
Just sometimes it might take a little bit more time, or better planning.
For sure.
Yeah,
I don't wing it. I don't show up on set and just wing it. I do my homework, and I make sure that I'm emotionally and psychologically prepared for what I have to do. Sorry,
you've mentioned method acting, and method acting, to some point, it almost seems like abuse, but they do to themselves. Which at that point, it's like, well, okay, you're an adult. You're, if you want to starve yourself to lose, I don't know, like 60 pounds, and then but if it's your choice, but when you, there's a lot of very interesting interviews with many actors that went through method acting, like Jim Carrey, for instance, that for Men of the Moon, he never came back from it. Because at some point we are the story that we tell themselves about who we are and all that. And yes, you can totally become someone else, but you might come back to you in a slightly different way or a different approach. And there's many, and I know that these days we're talking about Will Smith for not the right reasons, but I read his autobiography a few months ago, which is amazing, and he described how he tried method acting for the first role in the movie that he had, the Sixth Degree of Separation, I think, and that he had a very hard time to came back for it. First of all, he fell in love with his love interest in the movie, which screwed up his relationship, and he was not able to be Will Smith in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air for at least 6 months after that, and he had to need a coach to reteach who he was, because he basically played himself in that. So you can do you can do that for yourself. It's dangerous, but you can have. But to have someone else, and that's the same thing to come back to The Shining. That actress, poor girl, she never came back from it. Her career were pretty much. I mean, she just delivered the best performance of her life, but that's it. The career led nowhere. She stayed traumatized, and she never came back to who she were after.
Well, it was the same thing with Last Tango in Paris.
Yep.
They surprised that performer with a sex scene, was my understanding, and she essentially left feeling like she'd been assaulted.
Yep. Because she was.
Right.
I mean, all intents and purposes, that the pressure of having to perform in a way that you had not agreed to is kind of the definition of non-consent, right?
Absolutely. And she didn't act after that. And I mean, why do you think? It's is it worth making you there's this antiquated idea of we'll do whatever it takes in the sake of art. Yeah. It's like you want to cause someone a lifelong trauma for your film so you win an Oscar? Like, can you sleep at night knowing that? Like, I'm not interested in partaking in a project of that nature. Let's do this respectfully. We can do it.
And if I'm not mistaken, this scene was with Marlon Brando, which was another famously method actor.
That's
so
right.
again, and just to come back, I think it was in 70s. I want to say 70s. That movie.
So.
That would not. I cannot believe that in 2022 this could happen with everything that we've seen in the last few years. But just to again make a parallel with. I think that professional artists, probably actors, are among the most vulnerable to that. But I know some professional artists that just left and did something else because of this kind of abuse. Absolutely. Not physical abuse, but just mental abuse of you're not good enough, your work is, and eventually you convince yourself that you're not good enough and you want to stop mentally suffering about it, so you just go and do something else, and just you start by burning out, and then you just never properly recover, and you just do something else.
It takes the fun out of it. I mean, I had a teacher in theater school who used to say, if it ain't fun, run. And I love that. I love that because it's true. There should be a sense of play, and it's called a play. It's supposed to clue in on that. Yeah, there's supposed to be a sense of play and a sense of joy in the work. And I think in any art that you're doing, and ideally in any profession that you're doing, that you should have a sense of joy in the work. That doesn't mean that there's not elements that are challenging and hard and that you have to push through, and resistance that you need to overcome. I mean, everyone goes through that. But if you've lost the sense of joy in the work, then it's and I think a lot of people do leave because of that, because they've been in situations where they were working in a toxic environment or with toxic people, and they're just like, if this is what it looks like to create art, I'm not interested. So bye.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny because David's right, and just to be very, very ultra careful here, I'm not making comparison specifically to physical assault on a set, and what digital artists go through on a regular basis in studios, but like generally speaking, this idea of feeling like we need to just go along with the flow. Is exactly where people feel abused and taken advantage of when it comes to overtime. It's where people, in other types of things that happen in in just creative endeavors in general. If you're being paid as an artist, just like a performer, if you're an animator or if you're a digital artist or you're a matte painter, it doesn't really matter. The point is that your supervisor is possibly, it ends up feeling very, very, very much like you got to go along with it, because otherwise you might lose your job. And I'm a firm believer in the sense that, like you said, like if it ain't fun, run. This idea that getting fired from a job is probably one of the best things that could ever happen to you. But and what happens more often than not is people stay at that job, and they don't get fired. They just keep soaking up the abuse, and they feel paralyzed. I saw it recently. It was a really good. Anyone who's interested, you should check my Twitter handles right there, or the Overanimated. I had retweeted recently something that someone had wrote, a very, very amazing deep dive into the topic of, it's not just flight or fight, it's flight, fight, or freeze.
Correct.
And the freezing is absolutely the most dangerous out of all three of those, because it's the paralysis that keeps you in this uncomfortable environment. Because if you're fighting, at least you're actually taking action and something is going to be resolved from that fight. If you're flying, then you're at least removing yourself. But if you're frozen, and you're just sitting there and just taking it, this can be extremely dangerous to your morale, to your mental health, to your physical health. And it's an interesting topic. And if you're curious, you should go check my recent tweets, because it's in there if you're listening to this in chat, because I think it was a very insightful, and it was specifically, I think, for the video game industry, but it can be applied to pretty much any creative endeavor.
Absolutely. Knowing when to leave, knowing when a situation or a person is no longer healthy for you, and is no longer in alignment with what you want to do. It's so important to stop and ask ourselves those questions. We kind of get caught in the rat race and caught up and other people's visions, and then
that's right.
They need to make money or whatever it is, and then we don't stop and reflect and really ask ourselves, is this where I want to be?
Yeah, exactly. Social norms and politics, all these other weird things get put into play there, and as opposed to just looking out for yourself, basically.
So Amber, you mentioned having fun. What would you say, if you remember the many projects that you did, among those that you had the most fun, and maybe why those were really fun for you?
I had a blast on Tomb Raider. That was so much fun. Right. That was so much fun. Well, it's interesting, because in my journey of finding the joy in the work again, video game acting was a really good outlet for that, because I started with voice work, and doing voice work just felt really freeing, because it's not your face, it's not your body. It doesn't matter if your hair and makeup looks good or if you're having bad acne that day, it's really just your voice. So I found that super freeing. And then I started doing mocap, and I was just like, I'm a kid in a sandbox. I can be anything, you're like you can play creatures. I mean, that was one of the things I had so much fun on Tomb Raider. Like, I'm like fighting jaguars, but really it's, Sean Beichu with like a mat. Like, he's attacking me. Or like walking through mud, and it's like yours, or was it Daryl's belt that was wrapped around me for resistance. And like, we just come up with creative ways of creating the environment and the world.
Yeah, we had to pinch ourselves once in a while, say, are we paid to do all this? Because it seems that we're just having fun with two pretty cool actors for an entire day, and then we call it for the day.
That's right. During lunch break, you guys were building a blanket fort in the background. Is that basically how it was? Yeah.
Basically.
That's awesome.
Basically. Yeah. No, but just that freedom of mocap.
So would you say that in general, you have, whatever the satisfaction of the end result, the process itself, you might have a little bit more freedom and fun during motion capture shoots than during actual shoots?
I find that there's a collaborative element of working in games that I really like. That's different in film and TV. It's still there, but it's different. Like when I'm bringing to life a character in a game, I'm not only sharing that role with the stunt performer who's doing the stunts for the character, which would be the same for film and TV, but you're also sharing that role with the animators and how that character will translate. And I love it when the animators are on set and we can talk and they have suggestions, and we can work together. I find that really fulfilling as a collaboration. But when I understood that as an actor, that it was really that, working in a game that because you can just like you can do your job so much better when you understand what the parameters are that you're working with. And it's like, okay, my costume is like this, so I'm not going to be putting my hand through there. And, figuring out like, okay, let's put some foam so my hand doesn't go there. Or like, let's create some weight here. Or let's, it's that element of integrating, like knowing that this character has to be integrated into a world that might not be around me, but I need to create that world. Create the temperature, create the elements, if it's windy or if it's raining or whatever it may be. I like that element of it, and because there's less crew, it's smaller crews, and so we can get through a lot of material. I mean, we get all of the coverage. Like when you're shooting mocap, you don't have to do the wide and then your single shots and the over shoulder and and then the close-ups and the extreme close-ups if we are insert shots or whatever. Like, no, you get everything in one take. So you can cover a lot more material, and it feels more like theater in that sense, where you get to go through a whole scene from beginning to end. And if you're doing facial capture, then it's like you got your close-up right here, so you can be big physically, but you can be intimate in certain facial stuff. Those are the things that I really love about working in games. Working in film and TV, you get like having the real tactile costumes and sets that really helps to immerse you in the world. Like in games, it's like imagination, like visualizing the world. Okay, what's here, what's there? Okay, cool. But if I'm on location and I'm dressed in just the costume itself, when I put on a costume, right away I move different. Like it'll affect my body language, right? Like, oh, this character, okay, this is how she moves. Oh, this character, no, this is how she moves. Whereas in games, I need to kind of like calibrate to be like, okay, who am I playing today? What are they wearing? Let me look at the artwork for a second. You know what I mean? Like I gotta kind of get into it.
Yeah, one of the things that led us to work with each other is that we needed a well-rounded actor that could both act and do stunt acting as well. So when you said that your husband is the one that you chose to fight, I was like, oh, poor guy, because I've seen you fight and like, that's not going to turn out well for him. That's for sure. Which one of those two did you like the most when we were shooting?
Which one and what? Sorry.
In between the stunt part, the more physical part, and the more, let's say, acting, subtle performance and all that.
I love when I get to do physical roles. Like I love that aspect, getting to do both. Whenever I get to do my own stunts or do a character that's physical, I find that very exciting. It definitely gets me going. It's like it's an added challenge. It's an added layer. It's a real treat. It's a real treat.
Have you ever been on something before where the stunt asked of you was a bit too much and you're like, yeah, I'll sit this one out? Or have you literally done all the stunts for all of your performances?
There's definitely been stuff where it wasn't even a question. They're like, just even for insurance, right? Like if my character has to fly across the room, and they're attaching the stunt performer to a harness, they won't even ask me if I can do it because just for
too much of a
insurance.
liability.
It's too much of a liability. I mean, unless you're Tom Cruise.
And you're producing your own movie.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's managing his own liabilities basically.
Yeah.
Well, because the liability is, you said insurance, but it's also just a simple fact that if you get hurt, how do they film the rest of the film, right? Like you're like in the hospital and you can't, it's right. It's kind of a bit of a liability, both financially and just physically.
Yes, the cost of you not being able to complete the role within their schedule time frame, that is, exactly. No, but I do often I can't consider myself a stunt performer proper because, I've seen what stunt performers do. And I mean, the
Mm,
level that they train at is just incredible what they can
mm,
do.
mm.
And when it calls for that skill set, I will gladly just be like, cool, I'm going to let you do
Yeah,
your thing
that's
because you're
right.
going to make me look good.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
like
yeah.
I'm sorry, but like I can't do a backflip. So yeah, like you do your thing. But I would love to be able to do a backflip, by the way. I need to
Yeah, I
learn.
was kind of sad you were going to do one
I
right
know.
now, but now I
I'm so
guess it's not
sorry.
going to
I'm
happen.
so sorry. I started pre-pandemic. I was training at a parkour gym,
Oh, nice.
and my trainer was teaching me backflips, and I was just, halfway there in the
Mm,
pit of like the foam pit.
mhm.
But they closed. I was so
Aw, so
Mm.
close
sad.
yet so far.
Yeah.
I'd say doing a backflip is probably the most random badass thing that you can do in front of
Oh
anyone
yeah,
in any situation, in a
oh yeah,
party, at a
I
family
know, it's so
dinner, with some
random.
friends, at work.
yeah,
It
yeah.
always works
I swear,
everywhere.
Yeah,
if I could do one, I would literally do it in the most inappropriate, unexpected times as possible. Like, in the line
totally.
at McDonald's, boom. You're like,
Yeah,
wait a minute, what? Did you just do a backflip? No, man, I don't know
yeah.
what you're talking about. Just imagination.
It's like the Ukrainian cat. Did you see the TikTok
No.
of this woman walking down the street with her cat, and it's like a big cat, and all of a sudden the cat just does a backflip.
Just
And you're
random
like,
backflip.
what?
That's
This
awesome.
cat, and then they're like, it's Jason Bourne.
The cat version.
I need to send you this TikTok. I
That's
died.
good stuff.
It was very
Oh,
funny.
no.
But yes, I would like to be able to do a backflip eventually. It's on my bucket list.
Mm.
But when I can do my own stunts and it's not too crazy,
Yeah.
for Vicious Fun, I did all my own
Mm.
fighting, and I had a blast. Like it's such a treat. And I did a TV movie recently where I had a fight scene that I got to do with one of my best friends. We
Mm.
both got cast in this film, which is such a treat. Like, to get to work with one of your best
Sure.
friends, and we had a fight scene together. So that was pretty
Nice.
cool. We got to let out all of our
Mm.
frustration. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It
Amazing.
was all love.
Like-
Between takes, she was like massaging my scalp. And she's like, "Are you okay, honey?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm great. Just keep massaging me." It was
Good
the
stuff.
best. It was the best.
It's funny because, I would imagine that, like, even though you're not doing all of the stunts necessarily, depending on the complexity of the stunt, but
Mhm.
just the fact that you're physically capable, and like, because I mean, having directed a good number of motion or in performance capture shoots in the past, what I find very frustrating is there's a lot of performers out there that have literally zero combat training and zero stunt training, and so
Mhm.
just getting them to hold a prop gun properly is really, really difficult because they just haven't been exposed to it. So I can imagine how much more versatile you are on set, and I can imagine that's probably one of the reasons why you've been so prolific in the video game market, is because there's usually a lot of that kind of stuff happening, and having that kind of tool in your tool set makes you all that much more valuable on a set. And you think
Definitely a great asset to have. I mean,
Yeah.
having some combat training or having done some martial arts or even dance, like just being comfortable with your body and being able to sell. Like you need to hold a firearm and look like you know what you're doing, or
Yeah,
a sword or
preferably.
whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's important. It's very important.
Yeah, and you don't get that just by looking at like other movies necessarily. I've seen a lot of performers try, and it just looks awkward. Like especially firearms, it looks really, really weird.
Yeah, it takes practice. Like you need the
Yeah,
muscle memory,
yeah,
especially.
yeah. Yeah, and there's
Yeah.
tactics too,
Yeah.
right? Like, I mean, it's you holding a gun is one thing, but then the way you move with one, if you're supposed to be like an actual real operator, like you're either SWAT or military or something like this,
Yeah.
and you don't know how, like, these little things mean a lot. Like, you take a good example would be, of course, all the training that Keanu Reeves did for John Wick, right? And we see a
Oh,
lot of he
Mm.
like really dug his heels in on that.
yeah.
Digging heels doesn't make a lot of sense. Sinking his teeth into it, because he was digging heels would be like literally the opposite of what I'm trying to say. And it shows, right? It shows like that presence on set makes it makes him sell it all that much more.
Mhm. Halle
Um,
Berry too, her work on that
yes,
was
yes,
phenomenal.
exactly.
Yeah,
Also,
phenomenal. But
sunk
it's
some
like that
teeth.
was great because that production company invested in their
Yeah,
performers
yep,
and trained them.
yeah.
And
Well,
it
in
paid
advance of
off.
shooting. Yeah,
Yeah, and
absolutely.
so that's great when when projects take the time to do that, to have, having a stunt coordinator on set, even if the scenes aren't super stunty, but just to
Yep.
make sure that all the weapons
Yeah.
handling looks
Just for
good.
coaching. Yeah.
For coaching, having, an expert, a military expert, especially if
Yeah.
it's a military game, like you want the level of proficiency that the actors are portraying to match the level of the character. And if it's supposed to be a SWAT, and you're not, even if you're SWAT, if you're supposed to be SWAT, but you're doing, more of a police weapon handling, it's very different.
Totally.
Right? So knowing those differences and yeah.
So I'm wondering, do you feel like that could be one of the reasons? Because you've worked on a lot of games, like a lot. People have seen, like, we didn't talk about them because it would take too long to talk about them on stream here. But if you are curious, you take a look at just our schedule. It lists just a number of them. Of course, you can always check out Amber's LinkedIn or IMDb as well. But there's been a lot, and I'm wondering, is it just because of that background and you keep getting pulled into the volcano that is video game production, or is it also just because, I think you already kind of half answered this, because I think you seem to have a lot of fun on video game productions. Is it just kind of both?
That's probably
well
why they're
like,
she loves it. Let's just keep hiring her.
It's always nice to have happy Amber around. Yeah,
I'm like jumping around on set and like usually, like, if it's not a crazy jammed day, like if there's a little bit of breathing room, you'll see me like prancing around and like it's playful. It's very playful. But some days you've got a crazy shot list and we're like, cool, we have 130 shots to get through today. So no prancing around between takes. It's just like, go. Okay, we got it. Boom. Next take. Next shot. And like sometimes we'll do one take of each on really, really, really jammed days. But I thought, on Tomb Raider, we took our time. That was really nice that we had enough time to explore and to try things and to be really detail oriented. And I like that. I like that when there's time for precision. Yeah. When it's just like, okay, it's good enough, we're moving on. I don't feel
that was one of because the previous game, the development team had worked with an external director which was very good and talented at what he's doing, but was a little bit disconnected from production, which led to a lot of problem. On Shadow, the advantage that we knew what was important and what was good enough was fine. So we could just go like, okay, good enough. We that's fine. Okay, let's spend an hour on this one. So we could properly manage the time, because we kind of knew where it was exactly in the game, where the player would be in this moment and all that. So it kind of gave a lot of breathing room for what mattered. And then, okay, now let's just sprint through. And usually we try to organize the day accordingly as well, because, definitely an actor, when you get to an hour before the end, doesn't have the same energy that he had, let's say, just before lunch, for instance, where we're trying to schedule things accordingly.
Yeah, that's wise.
But just to follow up on Brent question, your first gig in video game, how did that came about? Is that something that you were looking forward to, that you looked for, or just randomly happened and you tried it and you're like, oh, that's pretty fun?
It was so random. I auditioned for what I thought was a short film. It was, do you remember there was a 3-part prequel to Assassin's Creed 2 called Lineage? It was like a sort of like web series type prequel, and it was live action.
Yes.
Yeah. So I had auditioned for that. But then a few months later, without knowing what it was, because, they were very secretive, as Ubisoft always is. So I was just like, I don't know what this is, but I'm playing an Italian woman and it's period. And then, so I got a call a few months later, and my agent is like, oh, you have a voice gig for a video game. And I was like, how? Like, I didn't audition for a video game. They're like, I don't know, you have a booking. Here's the information. So I just show up at my booking. And just like, go. And I was playing Christina Vespucci in AC2. And that was my first time, complete first time ever doing voice work for a game, or voice work, period, I think. And I loved it. I had so much fun. And then I was speaking to the director after the session, and I think, so I did that first session, and then I spoke to a few people about like, oh, I had like my first video game job, and then people were telling me like, oh, they're doing motion capture in Montreal now, and I'm like, what's that? And so I started learning about it, and then when I went back for my next voice gig for that character, I spoke to the director afterwards, and I was like, do you know if they're going to be doing motion capture for this character? And he was like, I think so. I'm not entirely sure. And I just pitched myself hard. I was like, well, I was like, I have a lot of experience in dance and stage combat and martial arts. You know, if ever you want to put my name forward, I'd be very interested. And he was like, cool, I'll do that. I'll put your name through. And he did. And I went in, and then I did all of the mocap for Lucy. And then I got to do Christina and play a bunch of different characters, and that was kind of, you know, the rest was history. And it was with Sean.
Sean
Beichu, who I have gone on to do dozens of gigs with. Like, he's the single actor that I've worked with the most.
He's in everything.
Yeah, it's hilarious. We at one point we coined the term that he's my I'm his Mogi, like his mocap girlfriend. He's like my Mobo or something, you know what I mean? Because we're just like always working together. But I was such a keener. We got to do a fight scene when I was playing Lucy, and I had to kick him in the stomach, and I was so like excited to get to like show off my fight skills that when Sean and I worked out the choreography. At the time, we did not have a set coordinator. Things have changed since then.
Oh yeah, no, that was the Wild West of motion capture days.
Yeah, but Sean is, you know, he's like a fight director. Like, he does know what he's doing, and so we worked on it. And I knew to pull my kick. You know, obviously you don't go full force, but I was so excited when we showed the director that I went full force and winded the guy.
Oh man!
And at first I thought he was just acting really well, but he like crumpled forward, and I was like,
and you're like,
no. So unprofessional. I just winded my co-star.
No, you winded you winded your motion capture boyfriend is what you did. That's even worse.
Exactly.
Totally not cool.
The first time we worked together.
Amazing.
Are you still doing a little bit of voice acting as well?
Yeah, I do quite a bit of voice acting. Yeah.
Outside of games?
Also, yeah, I do predominantly games. I recently started dubbing too, which I've discovered is really fun. I thought I hated it the first time I tried because it's very technical. And the first time I tried, I sucked. I really didn't know what I was doing, and I was off. And then years later, a friend of mine was directing a project, and I like to smash my limited beliefs. I think I mentioned that earlier. So, you know, he asked me if I wanted to, you know, audition for this dubbing project. And I was like, I suck at dubbing, but if you want to give me a chance to audition and you keep in mind that I might suck, I'd be willing to audition. And he was like, sure. And so I auditioned for it. And he was like, you just need a little bit more practice. So he gave me a small role, and I did that. And then, you know, I gained experience, and now I can do it much better, and I'm much more confident. And it's actually really fun. But I just needed some practice.
It's amazing. There's some people out there that like that's their thing. That's all they do.
Yeah.
It's like they're just voice actors. They're so good at it because it's a craft in it itself, right? And
people can completely change their voices. Like, I'm not one of those actors that do animation and that can just like change their voices and all. Like, I have a range that I can work within.
Yeah.
I like doing games because it's usually more in terms of like we're looking for realism usually, and it's not as cartoony, and that's definitely my strength. But I'm so amazed when I hear my colleagues that can do incredible animation voices. Like, it's really impressive.
It's impressive because there's many shows that have 20 characters and 5 voice actors.
That's right.
And that's it.
That's
and
right.
Each one of them are doing multiple voices, and sometimes from a child to an adult to an old person. And each time, like, there's no way I could say that it's the same. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it really is. Have you watched Big Mouth?
I have not.
Okay. It's pretty awesome in terms of the voice work.
Yeah. No, I know of it. I think my brother watches it. He keeps trying to get me to watch it. Apparently it's pretty funny.
It is. It really is. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes that I don't know if you've ever been exposed to, but like, I mean, the industry has gone through quite a number of revolutions, but you know, a lot of the stuff you were saying back, from the early days of the mocap, this predates performance capture. So you were just capturing your body and then probably needing to do some sort of voice work before or after that, I would imagine, back in the day.
So we would do voice work first, and then we would do like sync to playback
Yep.
type thing where they would play the audio and we'd act it out
That's
and we'd
right.
be like,
That's
oh, I
right.
need more time here. So the
That's right.
sound engineer would be like adding beeps and
Yep.
spaces. So we would,
That's
yeah,
right.
that's how we
Yeah.
used to do it.
It's pretty old school, and what's
Yeah.
interesting is one of the biggest sort of barriers to convince some people I like to call dinosaurs to move into the more preferred way of doing things now, which is a full performance capture. If you're going to do something cinematic, you want something that's going to be kind of a dramatic moment. The best way, of course, is to capture all three of those things at the same time, like the body, the audio, like the voice performance and the facial performance all at once in one fused thing, and then be able to recreate that later in the game. But one of the biggest barriers is audio directors specifically often had issue with this because they're like, well, but I'm used to working with performers that do audio work, right? And we don't want to just bring an actor or an actress in but we can't get what we need out of them during an audio recording session. And at first I didn't really understand that. At first I'm just like, what? Like, why would you? What? It's not even a what? That's not an argument. Obviously, a performer has a good voice. I mean, that's otherwise they wouldn't be able to do film and television. Like, obviously they can do this. But I think what they were trying to say, and I understand this now, having been at a bunch of voice recordings, is that they're worried about the performer coming back and doing all of the stuff, all the difficult, like the effort sounds, and like a typical voice record, like, because you've been in a lot of these. But a lot of people that don't do that kind of work don't know, and it's very difficult and inefficient when they don't understand the mechanisms, and they get driven crazy because they're saying the same line over and over and over again. So you're interestingly suited for like you're the perfect example. You're like the textbook case that I can point at and be like, well, but there's Ambers out there who literally have experience with physical performance, but also do audio, voice acting as well. You got to check all the boxes basically, because it's difficult to bring someone in who has not done that before. There's a lot of
I could see how that could be challenging. It really helps when you have a director who can give you an example when you're starting out. Like if you haven't ever done Barks and Onos before, and they're like, okay, we need 3 seconds. Like we need 3 seconds of you getting shot, a little bit of pain, and then like your breath, an exhale of breath, like a death sound. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then you're like, what? And then they can do it for you.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, okay. And then they'll be like, give me 3 variations of that. Sometimes it's easier when you hear it, or like a jumping and landing sound. Sometimes you're like, you're visualizing it and you're like, what? But then they do it and you're like, oh, that makes perfect sense. So I do think that helps, or playing a sample of what someone else did.
For the benefit of people in chat who might not know what Barks and Onos are, can you be a bit more specific?
Yeah, so the Barks and Onos are all the sounds of like the hits and the jumping and the breathing. So like, they're like, or just like all the different breathing,
That's
getting like stabbed and like the sounds, like getting electrocuted.
It's like you've done this before.
Yeah, it's like all the grunts, but it needs to be specific enough that it can match the kills.
Yeah, that's right.
But there needs to be varieties. You're not hearing the same thing all the time. But it can't be so specific that it stands out in an annoying way that you're playing, and then you're like, oh, it's that person that always dies with a really shrill death.
Yeah.
It's like,
and there's often variation too to break it up, so you don't hear the same thing. It's just for people to fully understand this is basically the sounds that are typically used in the gameplay itself. So like when you're just like you're the main character and you're running and you're like vaulting over an object, there's an effort sound, like what's the effort sound? What does that sound like, Kemper? Going over a little
like something like that.
That's awesome.
Or like a push.
We should make one of those little sound effect boxes where it's just you making effort sounds, and we could just sort of, people would think someone's playing a video game in the background.
But I like to start doing it. I usually I'm there like hitting myself. I must look really stupid in the booth, but I find I have to embody it without making too much noise, because that ruins the take. But
I totally agree.
Yeah, this happens sometimes alone in the booth. Just self, a moment of self-reflection and just laughing at what you're doing, and remembering this little 6-year-old girl that was, I'm going to act one day, and then you're in the booth making all of those grunts.
Exactly. I know. Sometimes it's literally like, wait, I'm getting paid for this. I'm pinching myself. I'm just really wondering, like, is this real? Am I dreaming?
Yeah, that is pretty
I'm
funny to
pretty sure
think.
there's other moment that you're like, so we've been doing game for how many years? Why do we still need to record those
Mm,
new grunt
yeah,
sounds?
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you're
Surely
like, didn't
there's
I do that like
yeah.
20 times already?
Well, I mean, I'm sure you probably have been in a situation where you worked on a similar project and you're like, I literally like 2 months ago did all of these. Like, did you guys just not have access to that library of sounds? I mean, it's amazing. We're renowned for this video game production. I know. Yeah, totally. It's better every time, right, Amber? It gets better every single time. Yeah, I know. I get it. I get it. It's the same for motion capture. Like we often reshoot things over and over again, and people are always like, "Are we sure we don't have this somewhere?" Like I'm sure we have a run cycle somewhere.
Yeah. But there's
But yeah.
definitely stuff. I know that a lot of stuff that because I've also done a lot of crowd life things, and I know that that stuff has been recycled
Mm,
from one game to another for
yeah.
sure. I'm
Mm.
sure. I'm
It
sure
does
they
happen. It
recycle it.
does
Yeah.
happen.
No, that doesn't happen. No.
I mean, it's impossible. If we don't re-record it, then it's not authentic.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we need to always,
My
if there's
my
producers
chair
on
is
the
being
call,
very squeaky.
when
Sorry.
oh,
Like
I thought those were just sound effects you were making.
Nope, not that
We
good.
have 15 minutes left, so if anyone in chat has a question, now is the time to. Again, Amber, time is flying by each time we're doing those, so that's it's pretty great. Maybe one more question that I have, because we rapidly mentioned having animators on set. And we had Daryl on the stream not long ago that we discussed about actors and directing actors and all that. Um, what would you say on for yourself? And one of the things when we start, especially in video game, I think more and more we're getting our shit together and we know how to do it. But I would say a few years ago, it felt like it was a bunch of amateurs that were trying to direct professional actors, and we had no idea of what we were doing. For you, honest, how do you like to be directed in general? I know it's a pretty vague question, but any indication of what is very useful for you, just annoying, best practice, anyone that would eventually have to direct actors, whether for, let's say, for a video game in this case, any advice for them of how to properly direct actors?
Hmm. Well, one thing is I'll say off the get-go is that every actor is different. And there's no one size fits all or one approach that works for everyone. It's like, every animator wants their feedback perhaps given differently, right? There's no one right way of doing it.
Mm.
And I think that cluing into who you're working with and how, like, just being attentive to them can really help. Because you actually might communicate to one actor differently than you will with another one because of that. For example, some actors, when they start a scene, they get into a zone. And if you're talking to them during the take, it might take them out of it. It could, their focus might get shot. Whereas someone else, totally fine. Walk them through it beat by beat, and they're completely good with it. And so understanding that and just kind of having those conversations with the actors about how they prefer can really help. For me, I find understanding where the character is coming from, like getting some context for a scene really helps to just be like, hey, what mindset am I in? What has happened? Where am I coming from? Because we don't always know. Like we're shooting things out of sequence, and there's been moments when I've been told information later on where I wish I had that information for a previous scene because it would have affected how I would play it, right? So I mean, I know to ask the right questions now, but just being told like, okay, this is where you're coming from, this is the state that you're in, and then understanding like what story beats are really important to hit, because we're telling a story, and what needs to come through to the player in this moment, what the priorities are, understanding that can really help. The other thing that I find that works sometimes well, especially for complex scenes where there's a lot going on, like I teach video game acting to actors, and we intentionally in our workshops choose very complicated scenes. And what I find the best approach is to layer things on, so we're not giving them all the information at once. So first I'm like, okay, this is your environment, this is the layout, this is the rough blocking. And also, of course, like this is your relationship, this is some backstory on the characters, and then we work through that. And then I'll be like, okay, now like this is a moment that we need to hit, like this is a beat, like I'll start to layer into like a little bit more of the details of the moments of the scene, like this is a moment of conflict, this is a moment of humor, a moment of connection, maybe a moment of flirtation, whatever. We get a little bit more detailed, and then I'll get into the more specifics of the environment, like here you need to react because your eye line is here, you're looking at this thing, or you're looking at that. But if I give them everything at once, they get so overwhelmed and they're like, their eyes kind of glaze over. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I know that look. That's been me.
Mm.
That's been me before. So I do find understanding that there's only so much information your brain can take at once.
Mhm.
So just giving the chance to layer, it really helps. The other thing that really helps is having a rehearsal in advance, like for
Mhm.
cinematics, especially.
Like a table
Or
read
I
at the
mean,
very least, right?
yeah, but a rehearsal too to work on blocking, because
Mhm. Mhm.
sometimes with mocap there's a lot of muscle memory and a lot of physical memory that if you have a chance to do it
Mhm.
before, then when you're shooting it on the day, those things kind of have already been set into your muscle memory, and then you can focus on other things. So I've
Yeah.
found that projects that have rehearsal days benefit quite a bit. We end up saving a lot of time too, because it's more expensive. Your shoot day is more expensive than your rehearsal day,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So if you take the time to rehearse, your
Totally.
shoot will be a lot smoother and faster.
Yeah, so just to for everyone in the audience that might not be familiar with what the blocking is, it's not an animation blocking, it's actually the choreography of the sequence. So enter here, go to the table there, take
Mhm.
this thing, go talk to you. So it's, and I was very surprised working with actors. I in initially I assumed that it was more the performance that would be difficult to
Mm.
get out of actors, but I found that usually was more the blocking, the
Mm.
complicated blocking.
Mm,
If it's very specific, you need to be here and then this and this
Yeah.
and this and this. This is usually the scene that would last for hours because they would get the performance part. But remembering that plus this and this and this and this, especially if it was important, this is when I was like, oh God, okay, let's simplify. This and this is critical. Just
Yeah.
improvise the rest and it'll be fine.
no, for sure. And it's challenging. And then the other thing that I like to do is create the world as much as possible. So instead of having to visualize and imagine this eye line, let me give you something to look at. Like I'm going to physically give you something to look at. I'm going to physically give you a barrier here. I'm going to cue you over here. I'm going to, you know, I'll say the things like as much as I said, you know, some actors, it takes them out of it when you're calling cues. At a certain point, you have to, right? If there's like gunshots, or if there's like if they're playing they're in a vehicle and they hit a bump and you have to have both actors react at the same time to the same bump, well, I'll give them like a visual cue, like a conductor. um, I try to simplify so that they can just focus on their acting and be as present as possible. So I'm like,
Mm.
whatever I can do to create the world for you, I will do.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the interesting thing too is you had mentioned earlier that one of the reasons why you like the performance capture stuff is that it's liberating because you don't have to necessarily worry about the coverage. But when you're blocking a complicated scene, the cameras do need to be considered. So it can be very technical, like because you're gonna have to put camera somewhere, right? Eventually, you just don't have to do it
yeah,
then at that moment. The
true.
camera's not in the way. But like the reason why a lot of these things are difficult is because, and also because it depends on the size of the motion capture volume. I'm sure you've been in
Yeah,
motion capture volumes where things have to be broken up and blocked separately in almost modularly because you can't get the whole scene in one big thing because there's not enough space, or there's a limitation on the number of sort of face cams it could be operating at any given time. So there is a simplicity to, you don't have to worry about weather and lighting and things like this, and makeup, like you said, but you do need to still, like, there's a technical layer that needs to be. Does it ever kind
yeah.
of get kind of annoying for you as an actress?
Well, I find it helpful to know where the game camera is going to be if you
Mm-hmm.
know. And I
Mm-hmm.
think having a rough idea really helps, because then you have to fix less things later, right?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like, even though you can put the camera wherever you want, like if I know that the camera is going to be playing out here, I might cheat my performance just a little bit. So you see
Yeah.
my face better. Or when I lift my lantern, I'm not going to hold it in front of my face if I know the game camera is going to be there, right? I'm going to hold it a little bit lower or a little bit higher. And like those details that can make the performance more polished and simplify the animator's job, I think.
Right.
So I like knowing that. I think that technically one of the hardest things to work with can be a head cam. And
Yeah.
it depends on
Sure.
the head cam. Like the ones at Eidos were actually very, very comfortable and
Yeah.
didn't inhibit your movement too much. But I've worn some where they come out so far in front of my face that if I have to like hug an actor or have any physical contact will like hit, or if I'm doing any weapon handling, if I'm holding a rifle, like my rifle will keep hitting it. So I find that the clunkiness of the head cam can be frustrating. He was like, I hit it again. I hit it again.
Yeah, totally.
Damn it.
It's like kind of a constant reminder that it brings you out of that headspace probably when that happens.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Or you have to cheat things. You know, we're like drinking and we're like pouring the cup down our shirt essentially.
Yeah.
Like all those weird things that we have to do. I think the head cam is the hardest technical aspect to work with.
Yeah, they continue to get better and more lightweight. It'll be curious to see what's going to be in about 10 years from now. I can only imagine what it's going to be like. Yeah. Because I've seen those first ones. They were big and heavy, and like they were uncomfortable because of those things and very obvious. And now there's like some of these are just like little teeny cameras. You can barely even notice them. Yeah. We have 2 questions from chat. Let's see if we can tackle those before we are completely out of time. We have like 6 minutes left. So we have this question here from Lovely Farts. What a beautiful handle that is. Nice job. Surprised that wasn't already taken. What are your favorite types of roles to play? I guess regardless of television, film, and video games, like I guess the characters themselves. Do you have a favorite?
I think definitely physical roles. If I get to do some fighting or have, I'm challenged to learn a new skill. I love that. I really like roles that have a good arc, like where my character really goes on a journey and I get to dive into that and create the arc and discover what each phase of it looks like. That's the kind of role that, I can really sink my teeth into.
Juicy. Have you ever had a chance to play a villain?
Yes.
Oh yeah? How was that?
Yeah. Very fun.
maybe honestly, more fun than it should have been.
Like worries you. The bad characters are honestly more fun to play. I'm not gonna lie.
I can only imagine. Yeah. Everyone loves a good villain. Honestly, like you can literally a villain makes or breaks just about any story. Like the right kind of villain, captivating, love to hate, difficult to play. I'm sure.
Yes, but it's so fun.
I can imagine because you like it's especially because it's like really activates probably the role player in you and be like really indulge in something that you probably don't normally get to be. I guess is probably I think that we navigate the world. Most of us navigate the world wanting to be likable. We want people to like us, and you don't want to ruffle too many feathers as much as you can. At least I try to avoid it. But like when you get to play the bad guy, like you get to say all the shit that's inappropriate. You don't have to worry about offending anyone. That's right.
It's very cathartic.
I can only imagine. I can only imagine. It's just like you get to channel all that sort of dormant rage and frustration into this character.
Totally.
It's probably therapeutic. Yeah.
Oh, very much so.
Okay. So I got one last question here. And I'm curious how you could answer this question because this is not specific to necessarily your trade, but probably maybe just you as a human being and your experience in this creative space. What is your advice in general when you see people doing less work and getting more credit for it? It's a good one. It's juicy. We get a lot of those in this chat.
I'd say that it's very easy to compare. We compare our success. We see there's always someone more successful than us. There's always someone who's making more money or doing better in their job or who's, more fit or more funny, whatever. It's very, very easy to compare. And so I try to just focus on my own personal development and my personal growth and just like compete against myself in a sense, because it's the only healthy path. Otherwise, you're always looking outward and there's always, doesn't matter how successful you are, there's always going to be someone who's more successful than you or better than you or whatever. So that really helped me be happier and more fulfilled to just be like, I want to challenge myself to be better at this. I want to do this better. And every time, like every work day, I always journal about the things that I did well and the things that I want to work on. It just keeps me focused on the right things because it can be very frustrating when if you see someone else who works half as hard as you but is more successful. It can just feel very hopeless and very frustrating. And I found that to be a dead end. So put that aside, And I like, looking to people that inspire me. What is it about them that inspires me? What is it that where do they focus their energy? Because I think sometimes sometimes the most frustrating things that we do don't pay off the most. And sometimes the things that come easily and are a little bit more effortless have like bear the most fruit. And I'm not saying I don't believe in hard work. I do. I really, really believe in hard work. But I know that in my path, there's been times when I tried to force something. Like I was really pushing, forcing something
Right.
to work, and it wasn't working. And when you try and you try and try and try and try and try, and sometimes you reach a point where you're like, hey, maybe this energy could go here. And then you put that energy here, and all of a sudden things are just moving and falling into place and flowing, and it's kind of effortless. And so I do look for that. I struggle is important, and struggle is how we grow. But I think it's important to evaluate if you're putting energy into something and you're never reaping the rewards that you want, and it's like so much effort for very little reward. Maybe it's time to reevaluate where the focus is.
I guess it comes down to what credit is too, right? When you say credit or reward, what is it, right? I mean, it comes in many forms. I think it fits in nicely with the narrative you just laid down. It's like your own growth is credit, right? It doesn't necessarily always need to be monetary. It doesn't always need to be like physical praise, but like it comes in many forms. I guess you have to manage your expectations probably a little bit too.
And even work itself, the same thing is that there are some that have more output with less work. So what are you judging exactly? And
That's right.
Yes, you have your own interpretation of what that is. So that's why I really like, Amber, your advice of no matter, you might be right, you might be wrong, but no matter if you're right or wrong, just focus on what you have to do and what you need to accomplish and how much you want to grow.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, then one last little thought on this would be, and it's kind of a big topic to drop at this point. We touched on it earlier, but I guess there is a line to be drawn to at some point where like it's making sure that you're looking internally obviously is important, but also, you work in an industry that is known for its inequities between male and women, or male and females, right? And so I think there needs to be, I guess, maybe some balancing that goes on there. There's a lot of people that have been outspoken about this, and I think the only way you're going to change something like this is if people are going to be kind of outraged together, as opposed to just all of a sudden being on just individuals. And I think there has been some progress by the sounds of it, but it does seem still pretty lopsided. So I guess like that's tricky too, right? Because it's part of that conversation, this idea of people getting less credit when you're doing equal jobs, like what's going on. So it's hard to not take that personally when it's very systemic,
Absolutely. No, it's true. And I do strongly believe in advocating for yourself and advocating for others. If you are in a position where, like, the few times that I've been in a role where I was producer, I would look at how people got paid. And I was on a project recently where I thought one of the crew, who was a female, was undervaluing her work. And we insisted on paying her more. We're like, no, you're worth more. We're paying you more. Whereas like her male counterpart had no problem asking for a very well compensated rate, and his work was phenomenal, so he deserved it, but so did she. And so I was just like, that was the position where I was able to advocate for someone else and their own skill set. But sometimes you have to do that for yourself, and it can be very uncomfortable. But I do think it's important. I really do think it's with pay equity. People don't often offer, like, it's rare that you're going to be offered to be paid more. You have to ask for it. And I think it's always uncomfortable, but it is important to advocate for yourself and whether it be for compensation or just to be treated fairly, to be treated respectfully.
That's right.
And when other people see you do it also, you're modeling that behavior, and other people are like, oh, maybe I should also stand up for myself and advocate for myself.
Right. So it's tricky. So what we're dealing with here is a balance, right? You can't obsess over it to the point that it literally ruins your happiness when you're doing a job, but you also kind of keep your eye on the prize and make sure that things are moving in the right direction. Otherwise, nothing's ever going to change, right?
Yes, absolutely. And talking about it, like we're so scared to talk about things, and like I had a position where I was offered, a leading role in a game, and I was really not sure about how much to ask for. And I called a bunch of my colleagues, including Elias Tufexis. And I was like, talk to me about your rates. And they, they were all so generous. And I was really impressed with the fact that they were like, oh yeah, I'll tell you how much I asked and da, 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 da. And they explained their reasoning, and it gave me the confidence to be like, you know what, given my body of work, I should also be asking for more.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to have those conversations, and to know that it always feels a little bit icky.
Yeah,
it's gonna feel weird.
But it's unfortunately, if people just keep saying nothing, then nothing will ever change. Unfortunately, right?
Exactly.
With no friction,
and also, and I think that the last thing that I'll say on that subject is that you can advocate for a cause, whether it be for equal pay or gender parity, or maybe it's for equality in terms of like racial equality, and just maybe you're fighting for Indigenous rights, whatever it may be. That doesn't mean that you have to walk around the world with that carrying all of the suffering with you, because there's so much pain and so much history around all of these topics, and it can be really heavy to feel like you have to carry all of that on you. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it makes perfect sense. Because it can crush you, right? If you
can.
Once you go down that road, a lot of people, don't. It's inconvenient to go down there and really do the homework, and because people deep down know there's inequities, they know that there's injustice, and I think a lot of people tend to avoid it because it's uncomfortable, and that's part of the problem. So it's like you have to find a way, if you want to be like part of the change, you have to find a way of compartmentalizing and like keep like playing the long game, but not letting it ruin the short game. Basically, like you got to find a way, because you don't want it to all be all consuming, and it literally makes you miserable in life, because then now what? Is that helping anybody? Definitely not.
Exactly. And I think that everyone perceives their world through a lens, right? We all walk around with our own lenses, and those lenses are colored by our past and by our ancestry and by our biases, cultural biases, all kinds of things, cultural norms. But if you're overly focused on a certain inequity, you might see it everywhere, or you might even see it where it's not, and be triggered a lot, because that is really what's in the forefront of your field. But if you're aware of it, but not fixated on it, it might give you a more balanced perspective, where when you see it, you're like, I see that. I'm going to address that, but you're not constantly looking for it.
Right.
Because that's just exhausting, and you really might think it's somewhere when it's not. And I just think that it overtake.
Sounds like a conversation in itself.
I know.
David knows I'm an expert at doing this at the end of these conversations. I'm very good at doing that, unfortunately.
Yeah, you're like, let me just drop a bomb.
Yeah, let's just drop something that we could probably talk for a whole day on, and we'll do it within 5 minutes left of the talk. So I wanted to thank you for hanging out with us today, Amber. It was definitely a pleasure. You're very, very laid back and easy to talk to. I think this could have definitely gone on for hours. So thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right, David.
Amber. That was great to catch up again.
Likewise.
Exactly. I'm glad that this was, at the very least, facilitating a good catch up between you and David. So
yes. Thank you.
Awesome. See both of you around, I'm sure. Take care. Have a good day. Cheers.
Care. Bye.
Another conversation gone like this in the wind. It is always fun to just hang out with all these amazing characters who show up on our show. And it's, again, I can't help but to be reminiscent here and think that, it feels weird that there was a day where we weren't doing this on a regular basis. But yet here it is as a normal facet of David and I's life, where every week we get to talk to somebody amazing, and they have very different perspectives on things. And I like how we mix it up a little bit and have a little bit of, treading a little bit away from the regular normal path of just bringing animators on. It's always nice to have people that are peripheral to an animator's sort of typical job. And in video games, working with performers is become very, very regular. It's like this in film too, I guess, but I feel like the interaction is less. It's very, very seldom are the animators invited to the voice recording session when the voices are being done. for a film. It's all recorded, and the animators are usually looking at that stuff. But I find one really cool thing about video games is that it seems like the hierarchy is a little flatter, and it's not unconventional to have really great interactions between animators and performers. And I think Amber was even talking about having sometimes, animators on the floor, and they're kind of shooting the shit a little bit about the choices. And Elias was on a little while ago, and he was talking about the same thing, where he was like, after a shot, he went and he's like, hey, just so you know, I did this thing that I think really works really well. It'd be nice if just kind of earmark that when you're looking at the data. And he felt like it was, at the time, he said he felt like almost like he was, I don't know what word he used, but it felt weird to him that he was doing that. But I'm glad he did, because I think that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of cooperation that should go on when it comes to digital performances, because it's not like we're going to get everything and absolutely everything we need from a shoot. It's nice to know the motivations behind some of those choices that were made by the actor in real time, especially if they ended up working out really well. I think that animators and actors are going to continue to learn a lot from one another. So I think we should have more of these kind of conversations. Thanks for being here in chat. And thanks again to Amber and David. And we'll see you around. We'll see you around tomorrow. Actually, tomorrow, we believe we have I think I'm doing another demo tomorrow night. And so hopefully you can, swing by and check that out. I'm still doing that Anatomy of an Action demo that I've been doing for the last number of weeks. And I think the week after that, I think we're going to be doing one of the free community reviews. So please swing by and hang out for that as well. Until next time, stay animated. Cheers.